So, you've thought about growing your own hops. Awesome. But you really don't know where to start. Well, I've got you covered. Everything from planting to harvesting and everything in between. We're going to go through it all after you guys hit that like and subscribe button, grab yourself a beer, and we're going to get after it. All right, I know you guys all hit that subscribe button because you're awesome, and you hit that like button because it helps out the channel a lot. But if you really want to be awesome, hit that join button below and become a channel member. Members enjoy awesome perks like some exclusive recipes, my brew day sheets to help you along the way and take some notes, and you get to watch my videos early before anybody else. So hit that join button and become awesome. Welcome back to Cityscape Brewing, everybody. I'm Dennis, and I'm going to go through everything you need to know about hop growing, specifically the 5 phases that I've broken down that will help you from preparation and planting to harvesting your hops at the end of the day, and including even some suggestions on how to add them to your beer. Number 1. Phase 1 is preparation and planting, and this happens in early spring or literally right now. It's not too late for you to get rhizomes in the ground right now to start growing your own plants. So what is a hop rhizome? In short terms, it's really just an underground stem. They look like these here, and they have a variety of thicknesses and widths and that kind of stuff, but basically they're the root structure of your plants, and they are what's going to provide new plants. Like you can see these little buds growing off of these. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in just a moment. But first, where do you want to plant these things? You're going to want to pick a location that's in your yard or wherever you're planning on planting these that gets a lot of sun, full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. The more heat, the more sun, the better. You're also going to want to pick a place that can actually drain really well, right? So not something where your downspouts coming out and it's going to be pooling up water, that kind of thing, because they do need a lot of water, but they don't love to be drowned in water. And so you want something that's well drained, and you'll want to mound up this hill wherever you're planting your rhizomes so the water can drain away from it pretty well. Let's talk about going vertical. You're gonna need some height. Hops love to grow, and they will grow really fast and aggressively. You're gonna want a place that can plant at least 10 to 15 feet, if not more, if possible, and a minimum, I would say, of about 10 feet. Although you can get them to grow kind of horizontally, they love to grow vertical and grow up. So if possible, for cone production purposes, you're gonna wanna get at least 10 feet, if not more. Also, adding the height will get them off the ground, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and that's super important. You want to space out your hop varieties at least 5 feet apart. I would suggest doing more if you can, and then I would create some type of a boundary between any mounds that you have that are a different variety. And you don't want them growing together and getting intertwined underneath the soil or even popping up by the other crowns, and then you're really not sure what plant you're really harvesting later the next year. For my purposes, I used an above ground box that I had already built on kind of a hill in my backyard, and that had 3 sides kind of a wood structure. And I ended up actually adding a middle section between them because the root structures actually did start growing together. And I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the video on what you should do later after your first year of growing hops. But there's a lot of different options. You can actually put them above ground if you water them, but they have a better chance kind of drying out and maybe not getting as much root growth in a pot, but you can do them in a pot. Some people actually take a pot or a container and they drill certain size holes in the bottom of them and they plant the whole container with the lip sticking up above the ground a few inches. That will help if the root structure starts going out, they will grow up and not through the sides of the container, but they still can drain through the bottom. So you want to make sure you add some sand or rocks or something like that underneath so you make sure that it can drain really well. Roots will get between there and they will grow down. You just don't want them to grow into each other where you're not sure what plant is what. So you found the spot in your yard you want to plant them. Awesome. You want to dig a small trench and about 1 to 2 inches deep. And you want to plant these rhizomes with the eyes, if you will, these little nodes that are sticking up, facing up. These are what's going to grow into your new hops plants. I would really suggest amending the soil your first year of growing hops. Also, add a little manure and some other nutrients into the soils right away. Make sure it's not just clay or old soils that really haven't had anything growing in them in a while, you won't get as much production. And then you'll want to use a fertilizer, which we'll talk about in a minute. Also, at this time, you're going to want to prepare the ground around it to make sure that you eliminate as much like grass and weeds and other things from growing around it and competing with your hops, roots, and plants. So I would use a really good cover around your hops. I did not the first year. The mesh that I bought, the grass grew right through and it basically like it wasn't even there. The second year, I actually put down a much better mesh, almost like a tarp material, and that should help even the grass from growing through it and keeping that mulch on the top and protecting all of the nutrients and things that the hops make sure that they get them instead of the other weeds and other growth around it. But let's talk a little bit about your structure. What I did for mine is I used 4x4 posts. Specifically, I used 16-foot 4x4s. I put eye bolts on the top to be able to run a coated cable through both of those and then down to each side to a ground stake. And the reason I did it this way is because I want to be able to unhook these and then have enough room to actually lower the plants down to harvest them. You don't have to do this, this is optional, but it does prevent you from having to get on a ladder or something else or cut the entire plant down, which we'll talk about later, in order to harvest, because you'll be doing this throughout the year. And then attached to my cable, I have a really coarse rope like this one here that I'm using that I create a V pattern from one side of the cable down to an eye hook on the bottom and then up to the other side. And that will allow me to have several plants growing up all at one time up the trellis. And the more binds you can get on those ropes, the more hops you will have. The reason you want a coarse rope like this one is so the binds can actually grab hold of this rope. And I'm saying binds, not vines. Vines actually have little spikes all over the stem and it helps it grab hold as it wraps up the rope, where a vine has little arms or appendages that wrap around and help it stabilize itself as it's climbing up. That's the main difference between binds and vines.
Number 2.
Now we're ready for phase 2, which is the early growth and training of the hop plants. After a few days to a week of watering, you're going to start seeing some changes, including some shoots that are sticking up out of the ground. The first ones that come out of the ground are called bull shoots, and that's the same every year. This will happen not just when you plant your rhizome for the first time, but every single year. And these are these thicker purplish shoots that shoot out first out of the ground, and their whole purpose is to get sunlight and start production of growth. It's super important to not cut those down right away. Let them kind of grow into a little bush, if you will, for a few weeks. So how do you tell which is a bull shoot? Is because they're a little bit thicker, they're a little bit more of a purplish color, maybe not right away, but they also will be hollow in the center of them, okay? It's really kind of hard to tell until you've seen the two of them, but as it grows up the plant, you'll actually have a lot wider spacing between the leaves, especially as it gets taller. They could be somewhere between 6, 8, even a foot between the nodal spacing. You don't want to train the bull shoots necessarily. Some people do, and it's okay, it will still grow hops, but they're a little bit more brittle and susceptible to breaking, and you won't get as many hops because of the spacing between the leaves, or what they call the nodal spacing, which is where the sidearms and other things will eventually grow. They're actually hollow inside like a little straw, and this makes them kind of brittle to snapping like this right here, right? But they're super important for root structure growth right away and getting that sunlight to help this plant start growing. But around mid-April, which it is right now, you'll want to cut those things down and get them ready to start training the regular shoots. I picked several bull shoots off of my plant this year in preparation for the growing season. The next shoots that will emerge will be smaller, tinier shoots like this one here. This one just popped out, so it isn't very big, but this one will not be hollow in the middle, and it's more green all the way down to the ground. And if you accidentally train a bull shoot, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal, especially your first year where you're not going to get as many shoots coming out of the ground. The years after that, you'll get dozens of them coming out of the ground. If you want to get more production the first year, I would suggest planting 2 rhizomes instead of just one. And if one of them doesn't grow for some reason, then you'll have a secondary kind of backup plant in there as well. Next is actually training those smaller vines to grow up the plant. Hops will grow in a clockwise direction as you're kind of looking up towards the sky. So they'll start growing up the rope like that. You'll want them to grow several feet before you start training them. And you want a little bit of slack between where the crown is and the actual rope itself. So don't just stretch it out to try to get it to the rope, but also make sure that it can have a little bit, as the wind blows, of movement so you don't break your plant. But once they start winding up and they start getting out of the ground, you're going to notice they grow really, really, really fast, sometimes up to 12 inches in one day. I was amazed how fast they got to the top of my trellis in about a month. As your vines start growing up and up your trellis, you're going to want to trim back some of the leaves eventually, not right away, but eventually. And that's going to help prevent mildew and other diseases from coming towards the ground, which is where most of that stuff is. And a lot of times that happens from watering or splashing on the ground coming onto your plants. And that's where you get powdery mildew or mold or other things that can affect your plants. So trimming up the bottom couple of feet, I do about 3 feet or so off of the bottom. And also by installing a drip system for your watering will also help that as well, because you won't accidentally spray the leaves and introduce that to the plant. So you can set up a dripper system pretty inexpensively by going to your local Home Depot or Lowe's or other home supply store. They're going to have drip lines with different attachments that can drip out. And I use a 1 gallon per hour dripper, and I use 4 of them per plant. So 8 total because I have Cascade and Centennial hop plants. I connect all of those together using splitters, and it goes back to a single line that I attach initially to a 5 gallon bucket. And I use a paint strainer bag over the top of that bucket so it doesn't get leaves or other debris in there. It's easy first in the spring when it's not super, super hot to be able to go out in the morning and then once again in the evening and fill up that 5 gallon bucket, and it will feed that plant all the water it needs. I also use a 10-10-10 fertilizer, which is 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. And the nitrogen at this early stage is very, very important for growth. So about once a week or once every other week or so, I'll sprinkle a little bit of the 10-10-10 around the plant. And then I use those watering drippers also away from the crown. You don't want it to drip right on the crown because that can cause issues for your plant. You want to also encourage the roots to grow outwards away from the crown a little bit and not get any type of root issues from being too wet. Now, once the plants reach the top, we're going to switch to a different fertilizer, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
Number 3.
The next phase I call the Great Ascent. This is where your hops are going to start growing and flourishing. Again, like I said, hops grow really vigorously and they can grow up to a foot a day. We talked about pruning for airflow. So as those get up, I'd say about 6 to 8 feet tall, you can start trimming the bottom of them up to about 3 feet off of the ground. Again, that's going to prevent those mildew and fungal issues and even some pests from getting up into your plants because they usually come from the ground. And at this time, you might start seeing some pests, and some of the more common ones are spider mites, Japanese beetles, and aphids. But some insects are good, like ladybugs. They'll actually eat aphids and other bad mites off of your plants. So if you see those, no worries. But if you see other things, or you start seeing holes in your leaves, or you start seeing some of the leaves dying back, you're going to want to check it for insects. If you see some pests, you can start treating them. You can use neem oil or even some over-the-counter garden spray type solutions. What I did is I found one from 7 that I actually hooked right to my watering hose, and I was able to, at night, so I didn't burn the plants and create mildew issues, I sprayed right before sundown the plants with that garden spray, and that killed off and removed any Japanese beetles. I had quite a few of them on my plants right away, and I started noticing holes, especially towards the top of the Centennial plants. For some reason, they preferred that one over the Cascade, and they did a lot of damage in just a couple of days. And so you'll really want to keep an eye on that and then spray them when necessary. It's also really important to spray them kind of before cone production happens, which we'll talk about in a minute, because you don't want to spray the cones because you're going to end up using those in your beer. Even though this garden variety is supposed to be meant for foods and other things you might grow in your garden, I'd prefer not to spray the cones if I could. So your hops are growing, they're hitting the top of maybe your trellis, and you're gonna start noticing they're gonna grow out instead of up. And that starts the next phase.
Number 4.
Phase 4, flowering and cone development. This is a transition from vegetative growth to the reproductive growth of the plant. So once your plants hit the top of that trellis, hopefully by the summer solstice, which is in late June, I think it's June 21st this year, they will have started growing side arms out and little burrs. Once they can't grow up anymore, and they'll start kind of dying back, and then they'll put most of that energy into cone production and side arm production. Right about this time is when I switched my fertilizer from using the 10-10-10 like I talked about to using a 0-10-10, which still gives it that phosphorus and potassium, but it doesn't give it any more nitrogen. By giving it more nitrogen constantly, you're going to confuse the plant into thinking it needs to grow, and it will actually stop growing cones and start growing leaves again, which can happen, and you'll get these little angel cones, which are cute, but they can actually start growing vines again out of them, and you want them to start producing cones because that's why we're growing these in the first place, right? But the phosphorus and the potassium are very, very important for cone development, so we switched to that. The one I use is a liquid version of that, and the way that I administer it instead of sprinkling it on the ground when I was using the pellets is I actually add about 2 or 3 ounces in like a watering jug, and then I fill it with some water to dilute it, and I sprinkle it around with a regular waterer, or I even put it in my bucket that's out there like I had before, and I let it drip out. But during the summer months when it's really, really hot, I actually change my watering system as well. And the reason that's important is because it gets very hot during this time of season, and I may not be here, or I might go on vacation. I can't get there in the morning or the afternoon to water, and I don't have a neighbor that can do that for me. So instead, I actually bought a beehive self-watering system like this one. They aren't sponsoring this video or anything. I just think this is a really good product. I bought this last year. This actually hooks up to my Wi-Fi inside, and it has a little plug that goes inside. And then this piece actually goes outside on the hose, and it acts as a timer. And so I'm actually able to set up a watering schedule, and I'm also able to then delay it if it rains. And so I put this thing onto the drip line with an attachment that fits to the hose. And so I don't have to really change the watering system in the actual hop bed itself. I just plug in and run a hose to the drip line instead. Then I run this for about 30 minutes in the morning before light, and then about 30 minutes again after dusk. Depending on the weather, you may need to scale that back or add more watering time. You just got to really look at the plants, and you can kind of tell if they're starting to seem dried out a little bit or they're starting to droop. It may be time for a little bit more watering at the watering times or a midday watering as well. So we've grown the side arms, we've actually seen the burrs start to grow, and now you're gonna start seeing those little burrs, which are the pre-flower, grow into little papery cones, which is the coolest part in my opinion of start seeing those first couple of cones start forming on the plants. And really what we're after is what's inside of those cones, right? The lupulin production, which is the yellow resinous powder that's inside of that cone that contains those essential oils and alpha acids, which is the one thing we want from the hops. This is the whole reason we're growing them. Yeah, they look cool, but we want that yellow dusty stuff on the inside. The oils are what helps bitter the beer when you add them early in the boil. It also helps give them all those fruity, citrusy, piney, floral, or other flavors to your beer. In fact, it's one of the only 4 ingredients you add to beer, right? So it's important not to pick these things too early. Let the hop cones grow, but there will be a difference between the top of your plant and the bottom of your plant. You're going to start seeing the hops start forming earlier on the top and getting done earlier on the top than on the bottom of your hops plant, which leads us into phase 5.
Number 5.
Which is the harvest, which is mid to late summer where I'm at, or maybe even early fall, depending on where you're at. So towards this time, it's going to put all of that energy again into the cone production of your plant, which is awesome. And you're going to start seeing more and more of those side arms come out. They don't need to be retrained back up the vine. They can just hang and create all of those cones. You'll see some people talk about trimming those or training them up. You do not need to do that at all. You should not actually do that if you want more cone production. So when do you know that it's ready to harvest? You're going to look and touch your hops. So the touchness should come across as really light, papery, and spring back when you squeeze the hop. You should also smell the hop cones, right? At first, if you don't rub it together, it smells just kind of vegetal. But as you rub the cone together, you can actually start smelling that hoppy, pungent aroma that you get from the hops plant. That's when you know they're starting to get ready. You can also take one of the cones and rip it open, and you can see the lupulin color, right? All those oils. It should be a vibrant gold color and less like a pale yellow. The cone itself can start drying out a little bit and even turn a little bit of brown on the tips. That's totally fine. You might even see that the hop plant itself is actually starting to dye back some of the leaves, and that's because it's putting all of its energy into those cones. So don't be weirded out by that, especially towards the top of the plant if you've harvested some of those earlier. So let's talk a little bit about that harvest method. Some people see the things online or others online and they take their whole plant and they just cut it down and they harvest all the hops off of it, right? Well, wrong. They do that because they're trying to time when most of the hops on an entire plant are done because they don't want to have to go and harvest the ones at the top and wait longer and that kind of stuff. And so they just try to maximize the amount of yield at like a hops farm. But by growing them yourself, you can do that and get the most out of each of your plants by harvesting a couple of times throughout the year, which is exactly what I did. Some of the hop cones at the top were done where they were just starting to grow towards the bottom of that plant. And so I was able to lower down my hops plant. I was able to pick some of them off the top for a kind of first round of picking. I left the ones that were really, really small and I pulled the cable back up and I was able to let them restart growing. And some of them grew more sidearms and more hops even in the areas where I picked. Couple things to keep in mind. Creating that cable actually helps so you don't have to get onto a ladder. But if you do need to get on a ladder, be careful. Also, you're going to want to wear a pair of gloves like this one. The hops binds themselves are really, really prickly. We talked about those little spiny things that grow off the side to help grab the rope. Well, they're going to cut up your arms. So even your hands, your arms, cover those with long sleeves if necessary, and they can kind of be irritating to your skin. So I would suggest wearing long sleeves and some gloves, and of course, even some eye protection because it can whip back and hit your face or anything else. Next, I actually just used some like rubber gloves when I was picking hops because that lupulin is really, really sticky. And then when you get done picking all of your hops, no matter what time of the year that it is, you don't want to cut down your vines right away. What you want to do is leave about half of the plant, if you can, up in the air. You can cut the top half off, but leave about 50% of the plant intact. And that will allow some of that energy to suck back down into the roots before the end of the year. And then you don't actually cut down that plant all the way down to the ground, flush with the ground, until about that first hard frost. Then you can go out and you can cut them all the way down and cover up the little stems with a little bit of dirt and let them go dormant over the wintertime. So now we got all of these hops. Now, how do we use them and store them? Well, I would suggest everybody actually use some fresh hops in a beer. If you haven't done that, it's really fantastic. You will get more of this earthy flavor with those hops, but you'll still get some of those hop flavors that you love out of those varieties, whichever you're growing. And you'll want to use about 4 times the amount of hops in your recipe, right? So if it counts for an ounce of dry hops or pellet hops, do about 4 ounces of the hops that you're using. Also, homegrown hops, there's no really way to tell what the alpha acids are. You may have more or you may have less alpha acids than the commercial hops. It's hard for you to tell what your IBU will be of your beer. So I suggest actually using some commercial hops, whether they're pellets or cones, that actually list an alpha acids number for your bittering hops or the ones that go in earlier in your boil. And then use all of your good hops that you homegrown and worked so hard at getting towards the end for flavor, aroma, or even dry hopping after the fact. So what about the ones you're not using for fresh hops? The best way to preserve them long term is to dry them out and then vacuum seal them and put them in your freezer, like these here, right? They pack down really, really thin. This is only about 3.5 ounces, but it packs down pretty thin to fit in my freezer. And they're nice and green, and you can even see some of the yellows poking through where the lupulin is for me to use in a future beer. So how did I dry them out? I actually used a DIY version, if you will, of drying. I used a screen door and I put one down on top of 4 kegs, believe it or not, and just put a box fan underneath to kind of dry from underneath to let that airflow go through. And I put another one of the screens on the top. That helps hold the cones in place for that air as they start drying out and they get a little bit lighter so they don't blow off of the screen. And about a couple times over about 24 hours, I went around and I stirred them around with my hands, and then I let them sit again. About 24 hours later, they were good and dry. That's when you can vacuum seal them and store them long term in your freezer. And then the very last thing I'll tell you about growing hops is the next year is also kind of important. Your second year, pull back whatever kind of weed management that you have around it, whether it be, tarps or cardboard or whatever, and then check those roots out. You want to make sure that your roots aren't growing real sporadically out in areas that you don't want them or towards other hops plants. I actually did that this year, and I was really surprised to see one of the cascade rhizomes was going right towards the crown of my centennial. This is kind of what I was worried about, is that this rhizome has grown all the way over from that crown and could actually get into the other hole where it could pop out, and I wouldn't know which hop plant was growing. And so this is the whole reason why we're looking down this line, to make sure that these roots have not gone and gotten into the other crown. So I was able to go ahead and actually pull those roots back out. If you dig them, if you dig down, you can actually pull some of the roots back towards the crown and then cut them off, or kind of redirect them in a different way. But I would just cut them off. They grow really aggressively, so they'll be totally fine by chopping a few of them back. All right, and that's about everything that I at least could think of to tell you right now about growing your own hops. If you have any questions whatsoever, put them in the comment section below. I'd happy to help you research something, or if you have any issues, please let me know. As always, I appreciate you guys hitting that like and subscribe button. Surprisingly, like 75% of you guys don't subscribe, which is crazy, right? You watch these videos, you get some good content, so hit that subscribe and that like button. And until next time, happy brewing and cheers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. You're awesome. You want to be even more awesome? Hit that join button and become a member. You'll get exclusive members only recipes and other perks like brew day sheets, and watch my videos early as they drop before anyone else. So hit that join button below, become a member, and be awesome.